Greetings, comrades. This is All Things Chess with Cybertal. I am your host, Cybertal. This is the inaugural video for this channel, so let me give a little bit of introduction about myself. My name is John Cole. I've been playing chess for almost 30 years now. I've been coaching chess for 20 years now. This is really the first thing I've done with it in terms of online material. I've worked a straight 9-to-5 job for the past 8 years. But I finally want to do something with my talents, and this is the inaugural video for that. So the methods are primitive right now, and I'm very nervous, but I hope you guys enjoy. I will have more content coming in the next weeks or so. So the first starting point for the content I wanted to make is where a lot of people are starting, is with the Netflix series The Queen's Gambit. First off, my assessment of the show as a chess player, I think it's the first chess media to actually capture what it's like at a chess tournament. Like, even growing up, it was frustrating to see searching for Bobby Fischer, getting just basic details about chess completely wrong. This is the first piece of chess media that actually absolutely nailed what it's like to be at a chess tournament. And I think more importantly for the gender dynamic for the character of Beth Harmon, it captured what it's like to be a woman at a chess tournament. It is a miserable thing to be a woman at a chess tournament, because the balance is typically 20 men to 1 female, and it's not great. But in terms of the actual feel of a chess tournament, the social dynamics, absolutely nailed it. And the fact that Garry Kasparov is an advisor in this series actually allowed for some interesting chess games to be used for the actual examples on the board. And we're going to look over one of those today. This is the final round of the Kentucky Championship between Beth Harmon and Harry. One critique I can make of the show, I thought it was strange that they made Beth so strong so quickly, but that's just a minor detail. The game that they used for the final round of the Kentucky Championship is an actual game start to finish, and they actually got all of the moves right throughout the series. This was a game between Nezhmetdinov and Kasparian. Just a quick introduction of the two. I'll do the black player first, since he's a little bit less well known. Kasparian was an international master. He won the Armenian Championship 10 times, which is pretty good. He has a lot more notoriety today as an endgame composer. If you're looking to improve your endgame play, looking up Kasparian endgame studies is actually a pretty decent way to go. The player of the white pieces is very well known. He's not in the top 100 players of all time. He's not in the top 1,000 players of all time. But if you care about art and passion and creation in your chess, he is one of the most notorious players of all time. In terms of simple positions, he was very weak. If a person playing was able to get into some kind of basic endgame or a slow positional game, he wasn't terribly strong. But if Nezhmetdinov was able to get into a position where the dynamics of the position were all that mattered, and attack was all that mattered, he is one of the greatest players of all time. And his game history is just littered with absolute gems, and that's one of the series that I'm going to be creating after this series here, is a study of Nezhmetdinov's more beautiful games. So we'll start looking at the game. Nezhmetdinov was white here. First move, e4. Back in the day, this used to be the move that an attacking player would play. I think that's that worm is sort of turned now, because there's so many ways for black to defuse attacking play that I think most strong players looking for a fight either play d4 or go for a sideline in c4. But back when this was played in 1955, e4 was the fighting move, and the move you played if you were looking for a struggle. Let me get a quick rant out of my system for improving players. For people that I coach, the one question that I hear the most is, what opening should I be playing? As long as you pick an opening and stick with it, it does not matter at all what opening you play. So, and I'm being literal in this. You could start each game with b4. You could start each game with g4. You could start each game with a4. As long as you pick an opening and stick with it, and learn the patterns associated with that opening, up to a certain point, it doesn't matter what opening you play. I think one of the worst things that a proving player can do is to spend a huge amount of their time studying opening theory. Opening theory does not matter at all until you reach 2600, and most people watching this video won't be 2600. The most important things you can do are studying tactics, studying endgames, and learning the middle game plans of the opening that you're playing. Don't spend a huge amount of time going over opening theory and changing your openings. If you're struggling with your results, it's not due to the opening. It's probably due to the fact that you miscalculated several things, or you picked the wrong plan, or you didn't convert an endgame advantage. Spending so much time on openings and buying opening books, it's sort of a band-aid, but it doesn't actually fix the deeper problems with your play. So, just that quick rant out of the way, just pick an opening and stick with it. That's the important part, because if you keep switching between openings, you're never going to learn the deeper middle game plans that actually improve your play. But Nezhmetdinov played e4. c6, this is the Caro-Kann opening. This is a perfectly fine opening. It's a really good opening for developing players who want to learn sort of a ready to go out of the can. It's a very safe opening. It's very hard to be checkmated out of this. Drawback, it is a little bit passive, and it does allow white to immediately form an e4-d4 pairing in the center. But it's really a perfectly fine opening. So Nezhmetdinov played knight f3. This isn't the main line. The main line is d4, of course. And then you get into either e5, that's the advance, is typically what I play when I play e4, or knight c3. That's the super main line. And then from here, there's several different types of Caro-Kanns you can get into. Knight f3, it sort of fits Nezhmetdinov's more offbeat and aggressive style. d5, knight c3. This is the two knights. Perfectly good way of meeting the Caro-Kann. Even today, this was back in 1955, even today the two knights doesn't have nearly as much theory attached to it. So if you don't like fighting against opening theory, the two knights against the Caro-Kann is a great way to dodge that. Bishop g4. This is a very standard Caro-Kann plan. Black gets his light-squared bishop out before he plays an e6. He doesn't want to lock his light-squared bishop behind that. You can see e6 is possible, and it sort of solidifies Black's central chain, but it locks that light-squared bishop in there, makes it incredibly unhappy. So it's a standard plan. Black gets it out there before he locks it in with e6. h3 immediately challenges the bishop. It's just a normal move. Bishop takes. That is standard. Bishop h5 has been played here a lot, but it just has to be labeled a mistake, in my opinion. Take, g4. And then theory has several different ways here. You could play bishop b5 check. I personally prefer h4. Just continue to gain space on the king side and kick the bishop. Basically, bishop h5 just loses too much time. Black's whole plan was to get rid of this light-squared bishop and then go ahead with placing the rest of his pawns on light squares. So, queen takes. There's a famous Tal game against Botvinnik where he plays gf. It's not a great move, but did it mostly for surprise. But queen takes is normal. e6. Again, this sort of matches Black's positional strategy. He traded off his light-squared bishop, and now he's going to place the rest of his pawns on light squares. That's going to accentuate the power of his remaining bishop, which is on dark squares. g3. This is sort of more of a long-range move. It doesn't put the bishop in a great position on g2, but he's looking to play a certain structure that we'll see and talk about later. The normal way to do this, to play this position, would be d4, but this has its own personal downsides. Black can take. The knight could take. That does sacrifice a pawn. And white does have some compensation, but more or less white has to prove it. Normal would be queen takes. Knight f6, queen d3. And this is just a super normal Caro-Kann position. Theoretically, white should have some kind of advantage because of his bishop pair, but in practice it's completely equal. And if you're playing the Caro-Kann, this is the sort of position that you're used to playing every single game. Black is very solid here. He has no weaknesses. And he has 2 pawn breaks to choose from. He could go with either c5 or e5. And we'll talk about what a pawn break is later. But g3 sort of looks to play a King's Indian structure, which we'll see here in a bit. g6. This is sort of Black's entire positional plan continued. He wants to put every pawn on the board on light squares to accentuate the power of his remaining dark square, with his remaining bishop, which is on dark squares. This is probably too far. He probably should have just played knight f6, and this is just a normal game, but g6 isn't terribly horrible. So bishop g2, bishop g7, castle, knight d7. Again, this isn't necessarily the strongest move. Knight e7 was probably a little bit stronger, but it's not terrible. Queen e2. And now Black plays d4, which is a clear positional error. It's really the first clear error of the game, but it gives us a good opportunity to talk about some things. So let's look at the next few moves. Knight b1, e5, d3, knight e7. So this is sort of the purified structure that White was looking to play with g3. This is a King's Indian structure. And you see this a lot when Black plays a King's Indian defense as Black. Even though Black theoretically has more space, most strong players would choose White here in a heartbeat. He's got the bishop pair. That's always a huge boon for most any position. White has clear play. He has clear play on the king side with h4, h5, or f4, f5. Whereas Black really doesn't have any counterplay on the queen side to necessarily match that just yet. The bishop on g2 is a little bit bad, but that's sort of a long-term issue, and White can always try to open up the position. Just going back a little bit, d4 itself was a poor move, because it sort of goes against what Black was trying to do with the entire position. He was trying to put all of his pawns on light squares to accentuate the power of his dark squared bishop, and then suddenly he blocks off his dark squared bishop pretty badly. So here, White chooses f4. This is sort of the immediate way of dealing with the position. It's not the strongest. I will include the PGN file with this video, so you guys can look over the game yourselves. I don't want to make this video too long, but White does have a better move here that I go over in the notes. But f4 is sort of a traditional King's Indian move. It's quite normal. You're looking to push on the king side. Queen c7, not the best response. Black should go ahead and take, and then castle, and that sort of prevents him from being squeezed on the king side too badly. But that's sort of another detail. So queen c7, a4, castle. This is a very clear mistake. It sort of puts Black's king in the firing line and gives White a clear plan of pushing on the king side. Again, he really needs to take. G takes, and then castle. The difference being, and I'll show you what White chooses to play after castle. White chooses to play f5, which is a super strong move, and allows White to develop a very strong kingside attack eventually. The difference between this position and e takes, g takes, castle is that now any pawn push from White gives Black some outpost squares to work with. By outpost squares, I mean, let's say White chooses f5. Now now both e5 and f6 are completely open to black pieces. I would say bishop e5 is most likely the best move. Now these pawns are sort of at a standstill. Black can't make any further progress on the king side. And the same is true as if white plays, say, e5. Suddenly black can play knight f5, and there's no further way to make progress. These pawns in e5 and f4 are completely blockaded. And then black can follow up with rook a, e8, and then f6 to attack. So castle, the difference being f5, there's no way to blockade those pawns, because e5 is still occupied by a black pawn. So now white has a very clear positional plan of pushing forward on the king side, whereas black doesn't have the same amount of counterplay on the queen side just yet. So f6, this is sort of quasi-forced. He needs to stop a pawn from landing on f6 himself. Knight b2, bishop h6. This is an excellent positional move. This bishop on g7 is probably the poorest piece on the board. So he is looking to get it outside of the pawn chain and trade it for something else. Whether it's the bishop on c1 or the knight on d2, he doesn't really mind. He just wants to trade that piece off the board and reduce some of white's attacking power. King h2, king h8, fg. FG is definitely the best move. As an example, g4 would be a clear mistake, even though it looks like you're still being aggressive, because suddenly the bishop hops in, c5, and that bishop on h6 that was one of the poorest pieces on the board is suddenly a monster, and now suddenly white can't make any further progress on the king side. So FG looks to open up the king side a little bit and continue to maneuver his pieces into place. HG, knight f3, potentially not the most accurate, but again, that's in the notes. I wanted to mainly get to the final position that we see highlighted so cinematically. F3, bishop takes, knight c5, c3. I would say definitely the best move in this position. There's an alternative in h4 that you can see in the notes that I'll include with the PGN file. But c3 is a very thematic King's Indian move, in that you're not trapped into playing on only one side of the board. White's pieces are better mobilized than black's, so any sort of opening of the position generally favors him, whether that's the queen side, the center, or the king side. So c3 sort of starts to put the squeeze across the entire board on black. So knight b3, just an example. Knight takes a4 would be a poor choice. Black doesn't win a pawn. And suddenly, black's one positive resource that he had, his central space, is completely wiped out. And then white can plan something like knight f3, d4, e5. And he's included more of his center pawns into the attack to help open up the king side. So knight b3 sort of looks to keep the position closed up so black doesn't get overwhelmed. cd, rook a8, not the best move, just an aside. c5 really was better to help keep the position closed up. The rook on d8 doesn't really accomplish anything. Knight h4. This is actually a point where Nezhmetdinov is very well known for his tactical acuity, so the fact that he missed this possibility is sort of surprising. He has a strictly superior move here in queen c2. This knight on b3 is definitely in a poor way suddenly. So let's say if he were to retreat the knight, knight a5, the knight's just trapped. If you choose to retreat it to knight c5, you're just winning a pawn, because the knight on c5 is attacked, so you don't have time to take back on d4. The only move to defend the knight is queen b6, and then suddenly a5 is a very strong move. The pawn is attacked twice, but it can't be taken either way. If the knight takes, the knight is trapped once again. And of course, the queen can't take, because that's the piece guarding the knight on b3. So queen b5 is forced, and then suddenly h4. This is a very favorable pawn sacrifice for white, more or less. The queen and the knight on the queen side are completely sealed off from defending the king side. And that is worth the investment of one measly pawn. Even if the pawn on a5 were to fall, that is a great investment for white, because he's got 12 points of material just sealed away like Tupperware on the queen side, which makes his eventual king side push that much stronger. So knight h4, a little bit inaccurate, which is surprising because Nezhmetdinov was so tactically accurate. So queen c8, bishop f3, sort of continuing the mobilization. He wants to poke his bishop out to g4, which is sort of a way of improving the piece. Queen e6, bishop g4. Queen f7, this is just a clear error. The queen's on the fire line on the f-file. Queen g8 was simply superior. It puts the queen back in a defensive position without wasting the time. The queen's just going to have to move eventually anyways. So knight f3, queen g8. And again, that's just a pure loss of tempo for black, which in a sharp position like this is often the difference between life or death. h4. very simple. He's looking to can open the king side. And because he's happened to gain a little bit of time by getting the black queen to move twice, it's that much more dangerous. King g7. Rook f2. This is the sort of position where white has a lot of possibilities. He could double his rooks on the f-file. He could play h5 immediately. He could play king g2 and put a rook on the h-file. Generally, you want to play the move that is included with all of your plans. This is sort of a tip for trying to keep your plans organized when you're calculating. If there's one move that keeps popping up in all of your calculations, it's typically a good idea to include that move and just play that straight out, and then worry about the other stuff later. King g2 is going to be involved with virtually everything that white ends up doing, because you want that h-file free for a rook. So if I were white, I would just play that move now, and then get on with the rest of your calculations at a later point. But there's nothing wrong with rook f2, it's just maybe a little bit inaccurate. Rook d6. This is just a clear error. There's the acronym from, I forget which chess book it is, but loose pieces drop off, libido. Rook d6, it looks like it guards the f6 pawn, but it also disconnects the rooks on the 8th rank. And this is just a clear error. Much better would be just c5. It solidifies the point on d4. Again, black's central space is his one trump, so he wants to build on that and keep that in place, because it's his only chance to really hold off white's attack. But rook d6, clear error, so white just continues his mobilization, doubles on the f-file, and then Kasparian just moves it right back. So this is between queen f7 and queen g8, and then rook there and rook there. Black has simply lost 2 tempi, which in a sharp position like this is almost always devastating. So this is sort of a good example of position. White is perfectly mobilized. All of his pieces cannot be improved any further. The rooks in the f-file cannot be improved. The bishop on g4 cannot be improved. The knight on f3 really can't be improved. In a position like this where everything is mobilized, it's time to open the position up. Nezhmetdinov chooses queen c2, which is surprising because he was so good at these sorts of can opener style positions. Much better is just h5. When your pieces are perfectly placed, it's time to get on with life and open things up. This is just a quick example line, but just an example of what white is typically trying to achieve in these positions. Knight c5 is a little bit flashy, but it's basically what you achieve when all of your pieces are mobilized like this. Queen h4, and this is just completely over. There's no preventing either mate or huge win of material. So queen c2, it's very surprising, again, that Nezhmetdinov chose something so passive. b6, not feeling the urgency of the position, really. c5 really needed to be played to shore up the d4 points, and we see this sort of come back to haunt him later in the game. But b6, pretty weak. And this is sort of a cute part of not the game itself, but the game in the Netflix series. In the game, Nezhmetdinov chose h5. Of course, Beth Harmon played this as well. And it's not the best move. And I did appreciate that they showed Beth making this second-rate move, and then later finding the better move for herself. So instead of h5, c4 is superior here. And I love how they sort of cinematically pan in on her finding a better move. It really made her seem a lot more human. The one criticism I would make of the Harmon character is that she became so good so quickly that it sort of dehumanized her. Whereas a moment like this really humanized her again. They showed her as a brilliant but flawed person and chess player. c4 basically just gains a lot of space for free, and then you can get on with your attack. Yeah, and then queen c1 is one of many moves, but basically you just gain a bunch of space on the queen side for free, and then you get on with your king side attack. That's it. Not to say h5 is necessarily bad, but less accurate. So, h5. So c5. This is a little bit late because you spent that extra tempo on b6. Hg, dc, BC. C4. This is desperately looking for queenside counterplay when it's sort of too late. Knight xg6 probably should have been tried instead, even if it's ultimately going to fall a little bit short. It's very dangerous to leave a pawn like that alive, which we see come to haunt black later in the game. Just an example of what white can do from a position like this. This isn't the only line that could happen, but knight h4, king g1, rook g2. Black's a pawn up, but it doesn't really matter because white's just breaking through. The knight on b3 is well and truly a castaway, and you're going to win that knight, or just break through and mate black on the king side. So c4 would have been a good move like 15 moves ago, but now this counterplay is a little bit too late. d4, this is natural and strong. When you have an edge in mobilization, which white certainly does, you want to open the position. ed, and then this is another sort of surprising mistake from Nezhmetdinov. White doesn't want to be trading pieces. He wants to keep as many pieces on the board. In this particular position, every one of white's pieces is better than their black counterparts. So any trade, almost by definition, favors black, because it reduces white's attacking potential. Knight h4 is simply on the verge of winning. There are a couple different lines, but d3 is one of the more interesting. Queen d1, and then e5. Yeah, this is just absolutely winning. If the pawn takes, just rook f7. And this is absolutely doomed for black. Another interesting line after knight h4, dc, queen takes. And none of white's attacking potential has gone away. By moving the knight to h4, you sort of preserved a lot of your attacking potential, and now the threat of e5 still looms over black's position. It's going to just be an absolutely winning move, and there's really no way to prevent it. The bad part about taking is that it forces a set of pieces off the board, which by definition favors black because it reduces the attacking potential. So, knight takes, rook takes, e5, f5. This is one of many ways to keep the position balanced. It sort of keeps the position clogged up. Bishop takes, queen d5, bishop e6, sort of a flashy move. But right now this position is completely balanced. Rook h8, just ignoring the bishop for now, and forcing the bishop back. And now this really should be a game that ends in perpetual check, or something close to it. But black plays knight xg6, which is a losing move. The best move would be to play rook d3. That keeps the position clogged up, and it kills the connection from c2 to g6, which is sort of the key tactical point in this position. So, rook f7, king h6. Black doesn't see the tactical threats. If he did, he might play something like queen x f7, but this is just a slow death instead of a fast death. This is still gone. But king h6, it's the most natural move in the world, and suddenly, queen x g6 check. I thought the show did an excellent job of sort of highlighting the amazing nature of this move. It's sort of rare for chess media to get it right. This truly is a brilliant move, and this is sort of a good example of Nezhmetdinov's tactical ability. In the game, in the series, it ended here, but just an example of why Kasparian ended up resigning. All these moves are pretty much forced. Bishop f5 mate. A lovely game. There are a lot of mistakes in the game, but I think it's an excellent example of King's Indian play and how to manage King's Indian play. I'm going to include the annotated PGN file along with this post if you guys wanted to look through, guys and girls, gender neutral, of course. If you wanted to look through this and improve at your own pace. More content will be forthcoming. This is my first video, but it certainly won't be my last. I have some ideas of where I would like to take this, but I want to hear your ideas as well. I'm open to suggestions. I take requests. Please give me comments or feedback. Right now my methods are a bit primitive since I'm still getting used to all of this, so any help would be most appreciated. Again, my name is John Cole, also Cybertel, and I will see you later.